In the aftermath of the Romanian Revolution of 1989, the country experienced a profound religious revival. With the fall of the communist regime and the end of state-sanctioned atheism, the Romanian Orthodox Church regained a prominent role in public life. It was against this backdrop of renewed spirituality that the Tanacu Monastery, nestled in the hills of Vaslui County, came into existence. Leading this remote outpost was Father Daniel Petre Corogeanu, a 29-year-old priest whose unorthodox beliefs and defiance of church hierarchy would soon thrust him into the national spotlight. Joining Father Corogeanu were 4 devoted nuns: Nicoleta Arcalianu, Adina Cepraga, Elena Otel, and Simona Bardanas, who would become integral players in the tragic events that were about to unfold. At the center of this harrowing story was Maricica Irina Cornici, a 23-year-old woman whose path to the Tanacu Monastery was paved with personal turmoil and heartbreak. Orphaned at a young age after her father's suicide, Cornici and her brother had grown up in the confines of an orphanage, their formative years marked by the trauma of their past. Cornici's arrival at the Tanacu Monastery in January 2005 marked the beginning of a journey that would ultimately end in tragedy. Though the young woman had initially found comfort in the monastic life, her mental state soon began to deteriorate, leaving those around her deeply concerned. According to the testimony of her friends, Cornici had never exhibited any signs of mental illness prior to her time at the monastery. Yet, shortly after her arrival, she began to display increasingly erratic behavior, giggling uncontrollably during Mass and exhibiting other concerning symptoms. Alarmed by Cornici's condition, the doctors at the local psychiatric hospital in Vaslui County diagnosed her with schizophrenia. After a 2-week treatment, they released her into the care of the Tanacu Monastery, believing that the structured environment and spiritual guidance of the convent might aid in her recovery. It was during this time that Father Corogeanu, the priest in charge of the monastery, became convinced that Cornici's condition was not merely the result of mental illness, but rather a manifestation of demonic possession. Rejecting the medical professional's diagnosis, the young priest steadfastly believed that the only way to save Cornici's soul was through the power of exorcism. Corogeanu's own path to the Tanacu Monastery was a complex one. A decade earlier, he had been a football player in his hometown of Vaslui before deciding to pursue religious studies at the University of Iași. However, his unconventional views and defiance of church hierarchy had already begun to take shape, foreshadowing the events that would unfold at the Tanacu Monastery. As Cornici's condition continued to deteriorate, Father Corogeanu made the decision to proceed with the exorcism, enlisting the aid of the 4 nuns under his charge. Driven by his unwavering belief that the young woman was possessed by the devil, the priest was determined to rid her of the demonic forces that he believed had taken hold of her. In the days leading up to the exorcism, the nuns began to restrain Cornici, binding her hands and feet and locking her in her room as they participated in the liturgy commemorating the Ascension of Jesus. According to Sister Nicoleta Arcalianu, the nuns believed that this was the appropriate way to restrain someone who was demonically possessed, as they feared that Cornici could have either killed herself or killed someone else if left unrestrained. The chilling scene of Cornici being chained to a cross in the monastery's church would become the centerpiece of the exorcism ritual. As the nuns anointed her with holy oil and prayed fervently to cast out the devil, the young woman's struggles became increasingly harrowing to behold. Cornici writhed and screamed, seemingly possessed by an unseen force that defied all attempts at exorcism. Determined to free their sister from the clutches of the devil, the nuns continued their ritual, even going so far as to place a towel in Cornici's mouth to stop her from cursing. They wet her lips with holy water, their voices echoing through the sacred space as they poured their hearts into the desperate attempt to save the young nun's soul. Throughout the ordeal, Father Corogeanu remained steadfast in his belief that the exorcism was the only way to cure Cornici's ailment. Rejecting the medical professional's diagnosis of schizophrenia, the priest insisted that you can't take the devil out of people with pills, and that only divine intervention could free the young woman from the demon that possessed her. As the exorcism ritual wore on, Cornici's condition only seemed to worsen. Exhausted and dehydrated, the young nun eventually lost consciousness, her frail body no longer able to withstand the strain of the ritual. Desperate, the nuns called for an ambulance, hoping that medical intervention would save her. But when Cornici arrived at the hospital, it was already too late. The young nun had died, her body bearing the marks of the chains that had bound her during the exorcism. The doctors immediately informed the police, setting in motion a high-profile investigation that would captivate the nation. In the aftermath, Father Corogianu and the 4 nuns were charged with Cornici's murder, sparking a lengthy legal battle that would pit the Romanian Orthodox Church against the country's justice system. The autopsy revealed that Cornici had died from an overdose of adrenaline administered by the ambulance crew, a conclusion that only added to the complexity and controversy surrounding the case. Prosecutors sought a life sentence for Father Corogianu, arguing that his actions had directly led to Cornici's death. The nuns, too, faced harsh penalties, with Nicoleta Arcalianu, Adina Cepraga, Elena Otel, and Simona Bardanas all sentenced to between 5 and 8 years in prison for their role in the tragedy. Yet, the legal proceedings were not without their own controversies. Many individuals from the Tanacu community were present in the courtroom to support Father Corogianu, distraught at the prospect of the young priest being punished for his beliefs. They maintained that the nuns had done their best to help Cornici, and that her death was ultimately the result of the medical professionals' failed attempts at resuscitation. Indeed, the coroner, Dan Gheorghiu, would later claim that Cornici's cause of death was due to the overdose of adrenaline given by the ambulance crew, not the actions of the nuns during the exorcism. "I was part of the team who handled the exhumation of the nun's body," Gheorghiu stated. "It was concluded that the woman died of an overdose of adrenaline. Don't ask me. I don't know why the judges did not take that into account." Father Corogianu, for his part, maintained that his biggest mistake was that I called the ambulance when I saw she was not moving. He believed that had he not summoned medical assistance, Cornici would have been well now, suggesting that the actions of the ambulance crew, not the exorcism itself, had ultimately led to the young nun's demise. The fallout from the Tanacu tragedy was far-reaching, with the event sparking a firestorm of controversy that would linger for years to come. The Romanian Orthodox Church, eager to distance itself from the horrific events, promptly shut down the Tanacu Monastery and defrocked Father Corogianu, seeking to send a clear message that such actions were not condoned by the Church. Yet, in the small village of Tanacu, many residents continued to maintain that Cornici had been possessed by the devil, and that Corogianu and the nuns had done their best to save her. The controversy surrounding the case would linger for years, with some arguing that the nuns had been unjustly punished for their beliefs. Indeed, as Cornici was lowered into her grave during her funeral, claps of thunder were heard, leading Father Corogianu to conclude that the will of God has been done. For many in Tanacu, this was seen as a sign that the young nun's death had been part of a divine plan, and that the nuns had merely been instruments in carrying out the Lord's work. The Tanacu tragedy would also leave a lasting impact on the cultural landscape, inspiring works of art that sought to explore the complex and often unsettling intersection of faith, mental illness, and the power of belief. Films like Beyond the Hills and The Crucifixion drew inspiration from the events at the Tanacu Monastery, using the case as a jumping-off point to delve deeper into the themes of religious fanaticism and the often blurred lines between spiritual and psychological afflictions. Ultimately, the story of Maricica Irina Cornici and the Tanacu exorcism stands as a stark reminder of the dangers that can arise when religious fervor and human fallibility collide. It is a cautionary tale of the devastating consequences that can occur when compassion is overshadowed by dogma and when the pursuit of spiritual salvation comes at the cost of human life. In the years since the tragedy, the Tanacu case has continued to captivate and disturb, raising uncomfortable questions about the role of the Church, the nature of mental illness, and the limits of human understanding. As Romania and the world grapple with these complex issues, the memory of Maricica Irina Cornici and the Tanacu Monastery will continue to haunt us, a stark reminder of the fragility of the human condition and the importance of striking a delicate balance between faith and reason. As the legal proceedings surrounding the Tanacu tragedy drew to a close, the case continued to captivate the Romanian public and the international community. The stark contrast between the prosecution's efforts to hold the priest and nuns accountable for Cornici's death and the unwavering support from certain members of the Tanacu community only served to deepen the unsettling nature of this tragic event. In the years that followed, new revelations and lingering questions emerged that cast an even darker shadow over the case. Perhaps the most perplexing development came when a former coroner, Dan Gheorghiu, came forward with a startling claim about the cause of Cornici's death. Contradicting the official autopsy findings, Gheorghiu asserted that the young nun had not died from dehydration or exhaustion, as previously reported, but rather from an overdose of adrenaline administered by the ambulance crew during their unsuccessful attempts to revive her. In 2014, coroner Dan Gheorghiu said, "I was part of the team who handled the exhumation of the nun's body. It was concluded that the woman died of an overdose of adrenaline. Don't ask me. I don't know why the judges did not take that into account." This revelation only served to deepen the controversies surrounding the case, as it called into question the role of the medical professionals and the validity of the legal proceedings that had resulted in the convictions of Father Corogeanu and the 4 nuns. Many individuals from the Tanacu community were present in the courtroom to support Father Corogeanu, distraught at the prospect of the young priest being punished for his beliefs. In a surprising turn of events, the Court of Appeals reduced Corogeanu's sentence to just 7 years, sparking outrage among many who believed the young priest had escaped true justice. Adding to the sense of unease was the fact that Corogeanu was released on parole in November 2011, after serving only 2/3 of his reduced sentence.